Good evening, everyone. It's 7:04. We're going to call the Planning Commission meeting to order. We all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And roll call. Commissioner Nordmal,
Present.
Commissioner Skussel,
Present.
Commissioner Disick, Vice Chair Fobbs, Chair Stansberry,
here.
Commissioner Hammond,
Present.
Commissioner Hillman.
Present.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to excuse Commissioner Disick.
I'll second.
It's been moved and second to excuse Commissioner Disick. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
I was not able to hear what the motion was. so
I
didn't
made a
vote.
motion to excuse Commissioner Disick. This is Commissioner Hammond
Vote aye.
making the motion.
And it was seconded by,
Commissioner Hillman seconded.
and we all approved it.
What about Fobbs?
He didn't make a motion for that. So he's not excused.
I don't know why he's not here. So.
Okay.
Does everyone have a copy of the agenda?
Yes, sir.
Need a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I so move.
Commissioner Hammond seconds.
It's been moved and second to accept the agenda as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Does everyone have a copy of the minutes from the previous meeting?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Has everyone had the opportunity to review them?
Yes.
Yes.
Need a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting on January the 21st? Or from January 21st, excuse me.
So moved.
Second.
Who said second? Okay, thank you.
It's been moved and second to approve the meetings from January 21st meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Next in the meeting is our public comment section. We'll open it up to public comment. The comments are, quote, 3 minutes. We ask that you give your name, street, not address, just street. And keep in mind that the commission does not respond to the public comments.
Well, here we are back again, folks. And I think most of you know I'm Diane Anderson. And I am very concerned, since I am a person with an association with Lathrup that goes back to 1951. I'm writing a book about it, with what has happened with development along Southfield Road. Some years ago, my mother was a founder of the Historical Society. And their brief was to make sure that the kind of appropriate development for Southfield Road that had always taken place occurred, because it's a bedroom community. It's not Little Birmingham, it's not Little Royal Oak, and was never intended to be. And I'm concerned about the two-tiered citizenship that has been created by the inappropriate development of Southfield Road. Smelly pizza parlors, fried chicken places. People are supposed to live right next door to that, while the people that live further in Lathrup enjoy quiet enjoyment, which is part of commercial real estate advertising. I think when you pit citizen against citizen by telling some people they have to put up with that kind of stench, noise, traffic, and also there's danger. We never had restaurants in Lathrup other than the Colonial Dining Room, which was torched about 2000. And it had no houses around it, and it was an upmarket sort of little place. It had no odors coming from it. We never had a problem with homicides, stranger danger, and then all of a sudden up came the Rib Shack. Up came people coming in late at night. Out came the woman with the payroll. And all of a sudden we have a stranger danger homicide, because bedroom communities of 1.5 square miles don't want to have that kind of activity late at night that can create those kind of problems. The reality is Lathrup's architectural heritage has been trashed. As someone who loves this place, whose parents built the first house here after the war in '46, I think that from my observation, more damage has been done to Lathrop in the last 8 years than in the previous 8 decades. It is utterly, utterly, utterly inappropriate development. It has created a two-tiered citizenry. It has trashed our architectural heritage, which was one of the big things we had going. So I'm not going to go further than that. You've got my little handout, but I do feel very sad to see our heritage trashed.
My name is Alicia Lundell. I live on San Jose. Regarding the next old business and tabled about the zoning amendment, I just want to keep in mind, if it has first floor commercial, does that mean that we're looking at a parking lot along Southfield Road? If it has first floor residential, does that mean we're looking at lawn and trees along Southfield Road? It's my understanding this is private property, and we do not want it to degrade by neglect over time. The owner could choose to just sit and let it waste away. We need to come up with a compromise. If the lower level along Southfield Road perhaps only is 2 stories, but then the next level back is 3 or 4, so that when you're driving along the road, you can still see the Annie Lathrup. It's more predominant than having 4 stories just blanketing it, and you only see it when you're just glimpsing by, if you happen to even look. Perhaps the back level could have a balcony or something. It's more of a penthouse. I mean, we have to think outside the box, because our options are to let it fall into decline by doing nothing, and the owner just waiting until enough residents approve something, a change in the ordinance. Or we work with the developer to make it as appealing, and in my opinion, if it's residential on the first floor, isn't that more of a bedroom community than more commercial, where we've already got a bunch of vacancies? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Leslie Ballion, and I live on Rackham. And I just have a question for the Planning Commission, because I'm a little confused. I'm a little bit new here. I've lived here for 3 years. And I've been hearing things about, in terms of the GDA and then the City Council and even you, talk about that we need a village center. And that part of the reason why we have these ordinances not to have the first floor residential is so that we can have a walking, downtown, a downtown that's filled with coffee shops and boutiques and, maybe antique stores and things like that. But when you have first floor residential, that's obviously going to be stopping that kind of traffic, and that's not going to be promoting that type of a village center. So I'm a little bit confused about what our vision is for a village center. And then I just wanted to bring up something else. I've got 2 seconds. The MEDC that Mike sent out doesn't really reflect Lathrup Villages. The 6 cities are much larger than we are, and they are also cities that saw industrialization, and we have not seen industrialization. And the 3 smaller cities are Adrian, Marquette, and Alpena. And those 3 of the smaller cities out of the 6 that he referenced for the type of loan or cannot be compared with Lathrup Village, which is a bedroom community that has never seen an industrialization, manufacturing, and then the decline of that. So I thought that that study really didn't reflect on the kind of community that we are, but thank you.
name is Don Eichstad. I live on Redwood. I think the best use of a historic school is as a school. A four-story apartment building does not fit the Lathrup Village image. I see no reason to subsidize Searle's apartment building with our property tax dollars. The appearance of the current proposal is non-historic and appears to be not the highest price of materials. And the projected 90,000 rental income, which is not guaranteed, is peanuts compared to our $6 million general fund budget. So it's insignificant. Thank you.
Good evening, Bruce Copus, Woodworth Way. I was looking over the changes that are currently being considered for implementation, and basically it's A, B, C, and D. None of them really are justified in this particular situation. B suggests that the project satisfied a demonstrated need for housing in the city of Lathrup Village. I don't know if you've seen a study, if a study exists. I have not seen it. So I'm not sure where B comes from. And then D, the project is consistent with the city master plan. We, in the city master plan, never envisioned an apartment complex on Southfield Road, certainly not first floor. We did identify housing for seniors, and that comes up numerous times in the master plan. But it's just not part of the master plan. Thank you.
Is there anyone else for the public comment? We'll close the public comment section and move on to old business and table items. I see Eric is not feeling well, so before we get to the public hearing, you want to bring us up, Jill, to date?
Thank you. I'm Jill Bain. I am a partner with Giffords Webster and one of the city's planning consultants. I thought it could be really interesting and helpful to have a real, I hate to do this to you, a deep dive into some of the planning history that's gone on in the community, at least as long as I've been involved, which started in 2010. Back then, in 2010, I was with Birchler Arroyo. Eventually, we merged in with Giffords Webster, and that's how that all came to be. But our office was actually right across the street. And so as some of the things that were going on in 2008, 2009 started happening, Dave Birchler was very involved and donating and volunteering his time. And we ended up doing work then with the city. And so I wanted to share some of the things that we've done to help the city and initiated by the city over the last few years. So I started this by just refreshing a little bit, a presentation that Matt Baumgarten and I did for the Oakland County Heritage Conference, and that was in 2014. This was a presentation to discuss and share the unique history of the evolution of Lathrup Village. So I've got a little planning history, and then a little discussion about master planning, and then some conversation about zoning. And I will try to go through it. It's super interesting. So I'm going to go through it. I'm going to take my time a little bit, but I know that Commissioner Stansberry would like to move things along as quickly as possible. So I'll try to be mindful of that. This is really interesting, and I appreciate the history perspective that was mentioned because it is a really unique history. So there's a little bit more that I'll get into the Garden City concept tomorrow, and I will do a similar presentation to the Historic District Commission. But as you know, these 1,000 acres of land were purchased by Louise Lathrup, and she had this vision of creating a garden city, and she chose this area, calling it a neighbor to parks, clubs, and lakes. So, as you all know, the way that the city was laid out in this radial pattern with the center on the village green there, and that eventually became the school and the town hall. There's a lot of little narrow lots that are all along Southfield Road, and it's not really clear from the history what was intended to be built there, if they were intended to be smaller residential units, or if they were intended to be commercial. It didn't end up evolving that way. But what I always thought was really interesting about this, and why the city was laid out this way, and what the vision was, and really why this city, as many others, became bedroom communities and stayed bedroom communities, is because there was this vision that there was going to be these super highways going through the region. And there were 4 great arteries. Those were Southfield Road, Sunset Boulevard, Northwestern Highway, and the 11-mile road. And so that was the vision, and that was intended to connect all of these areas out in the suburbs, what became the suburbs, with the city of Detroit, and that people would work in the city of Detroit and they would live in these other areas for a number of reasons. So these superhighways were 204-foot wide roads, and the idea is that they would accommodate rapid transit rail lines in the center with pavement along the side. So over the years, there were missed opportunities. So we had several attempts at, including the Detroit United Railway, the DUR, how that merged in, and the city of Detroit purchased that. All kinds of track was laid, and we just kept struggling with coming up with a regional system that made sense. And probably politics is involved in there too. Eventually, we just kind of realized that this was really not ever going to happen. So a lot of communities were left with sort of this interesting pattern of development. So this is an aerial from 1952, and you can see that most of that residential started over here on the west side of the city, but there's really nothing happening on Southfield Road itself, and that was 1952. So we were still thinking that maybe we're going to evolve in this way of just being residential. But then, and as we move into the 50s, you start to see a little bit. Now you start to see the little school and the town hall. And then as we go into the late 60s, you start to see the office buildings. So now we're recognizing that people are trying to move out of the city of Detroit, and jobs are moving out there, and so people are moving out here. So now this is where we start to see a change in how the development pattern, not only in this community, but in other communities, changed. We went from strictly being literally bedroom communities to being more, trying to have more variety there, make people not have to drive as far. We started seeing offices springing up and other commercial goods and services to serve the people that lived in these communities. And so that's how we saw development evolve along Southfield Road. And then we should point out that then we also had 696 that barrels through the city, and how that changed even further the history and the evolution and the shape and the functioning of this community. So this, we updated this in just today. Looking at our population, hovering around 4,000 people. Our median age, that was 47.1, which is an increase. So the community is continuing to age, just as in communities across this region, through our state, and even in the country as a whole, our populations are getting older. By 2050, it's projected that 28% of the city's population will be over age 65. So those are things that we need to be aware of. The city has become more diverse over the years, but still, the majority of the city's housing, 92%, are owner-occupied single-family residential homes. The majority of the homes were built prior to 1970, with over half being built before 1960. So we have an older housing stock in the community, mostly single-family detached homes. But homes stay in good repair, and they make a significant contribution to the city's community character. When people talk about and think about Lathrup Village, they often think of the neighborhoods as charming as they are, as unique as they are, and all the trees in the neighborhoods. It's a really nice, comfortable feeling. So we do have a couple of short videos that I wanted to show, because back in 2009, there was a new vision for Southfield Road. And that vision included a large 50 to 60 foot wide median boulevard right down the middle of Southfield Road. That came on the heels of a 2009 master plan for the community that we did not help with. But in that master plan, there was a vision for this village center to capture this area and the area where the school is and across the street, and turn that into the center of the community, a place for civic activities, commercial activities, mixed use, vibrant, active, using the parks there as an anchor as well. And then this vision for Southfield Road came along, and city leaders said, well, that's not really gonna work if we have this idea for this village center. How are we gonna get across the street? We've got this giant median. People are gonna fly through this community without stopping. And that wasn't really what people had envisioned. So here, Mayor Frank Brock spoke, this was I think 2012 or 13.
It's considering how do we get started, how do we approach establishing a new vision and a new plan for our communities, is to get started. And the worst thing we can do is sit around and not begin making some effort to connect with our citizens and find out what their vision and to develop an overall shared vision for our community. And I think that's what we've done. We brought in folks that could help us and assist us as we went through a logical and thorough planning process that has resulted in a new master plan, new zoning ordinance, all the steps that we think are important for our community. Our citizens were very vocal and very forthright about helping us articulate this vision. The desire for, bringing our community back together. This is a community that was facing several problems. The division of the community with Southfield Road as a major thoroughfare, with 696 bisecting the community in another direction, and thus really splintering the city into at least 4 distinct sections. So the desire of this was for a vision that would help reunite, bring this community back together.
So again, this was the 2009 master plan. This was the future land use map that came from that, which focused on preserving the existing single-family residential areas, all the areas in yellow, be preserved as single-family residential. Allow and encourage an increase in mixed land uses, allow for multiple story buildings, and those were all focused on Southfield Road as well as the mile roads. Importantly, thinking of the city as a destination rather than a place to pass through. Improving the curb appeal with attractive and complementary architecture, landscaping, making a more walkable community, improving the schools, and thinking about gateways to the city. So those were the highlights of that 2009 master plan. This is Renee McLean. She was a planning commissioner at that time as well. She'll talk about all the things that she really wanted to see here. Or not. If not, we can always come back to her later. But Renee spoke about, as she was standing right outside this building, talked about the things that her vision for the future of the city would be a place where residents could do most of their shopping and seek entertainment, go out to eat, all within a reasonable distance of their homes. Whether that meant driving or even walking would be ideal, and that people would be able to solve most of their daily needs right within their neighborhood and city of Lathrup Village. So we included in 2014, because this was an educational sharing seminar, conference session that we did for in Oakland County, we had takeaways. So our takeaways from the master plan process was that the city looked back at how it was originally developed to see how concepts could be revisited and adapted for today. I think that was based on the idea that we thought that this was an unfulfilled village center. And really, it was in many regards. We said take advantage of the 5-year master plan review requirement to affirm the vision. And at that time, the 2014 update had just been completed. We've done it again 6 years after that. No need to wait 5 years between planning efforts. Changes in the community can trigger amending plans. Waiting for improved economic conditions may be too late to correct issues, and using the opportunity to engage the community. So again, thinking about the impact of Southfield Road on redevelopment, it cannot really be overstated, the challenge that the city has with Southfield Road and the kind of development desired, especially in terms of walkability. So we know that the original concept never materialized, that superhighway, but what we have is a giant 5-lane road with a lot of right-of-way and very, very much serving the automobile. And so those have been the challenges that have been ongoing. So again, in 2009, the city realized that Southfield Road widening to the wide median boulevard didn't match the master plan. The Road Commission had received federal funding, and they were in the process of designing this suburban-style boulevard. It would have taken out the front yard for many businesses. In fact, that was one of the reasons why Dave Birchler and Rod Arroyo got involved from our firm, is because the roadway would have come up within 7 feet of our building. It would increase the crossing distance for pedestrians and further establish the suburban character of the corridor, which, as the city had just been through that master plan process, determined it didn't want to do. So in 2009, the city developed an access management plan with a narrow boulevard concept. It's a little hard to see on the graphic, but it was a way of demonstrating to the Road Commission that there were alternative ways of addressing road issues. The Road Commission was not happy, but they agreed to forego the approved funding and initiate a new design process. This work is ongoing. It's from 2014. I didn't change it. It's been an ongoing discussion and planning process with the Road Commission, and as they have moved on to other projects and other funding priorities, they have been willing, at least though, to discuss, and new streetscape improvements have been made recently to facilitate pedestrian crossings, safer crossings, and make it easier and safer for people to get around. Following that, in 2011, the city initiated a complete streets plan. Actually, the city of Lathrup Village was the first community in Oakland County to adopt a complete streets plan. And this is an element that became required, actually, as part of the Michigan Planning Enabling Act. There was an ordinance created and a non-motorized transportation improvement plan, which was like an action plan for that. Let Reverend Oscar King III talk about complete streets real quick. I hope this one works. All right, we may have to come back. Reverend King's was very interested in, oh, maybe that would work.
I think that plan means a connection. Various sundry modes of transportation. I think that plan means a connection. Various sundry modes of transportation.
We'll figure out another way to do that later.
I think that plan means a connection because we've got. I think that plan means a connection because we've got various and sundry modes of transportation. We have those. I think that plan means a connection because we've got various and sundry modes of transportation. We have those who walk, those who drive through, those who are on their bicycles and other means of transportation. And what the Complete Streets does, in my sense, is that it redefines Lathrup Village so that it becomes something more than something you drive through to get somewhere else. It becomes a destination, a well-planned destination that can respond to what was, what is, and allow us to plan for the future.
That was one of my favorite parts that over the years I have still appreciated, is Reverend King talking about reflecting on what was and what is and thinking about planning for the future. That's what we do. When we think about complete streets, we're thinking about providing for all modes of transportation in the city and giving people transportation choices. So whether we drive or we ride a bicycle or we walk, we are able to reach the places that we'd like to go in the city. What's really important is to remember that here around the village center, it's very easy well, if you're on this side of Southfield Road, right, to get to this building, to get to the parks, to get to the activities and events that take place here. If you're on the west side, it's a little bit harder because you've got to get across Southfield Road. But if you're south of 696, it becomes much more difficult to get here any other way than jumping in your car. And thinking about connecting a community was really an important feature of thinking about the Complete Streets plan. So over the years, this has been implemented, and it really does, I would say, if you think about the area that's northeast of 11 and Evergreen, there were few unpaved streets there and no sidewalks, and people wanted to keep it that way for a while. So what were the takeaways there? The Complete Streets provides an ongoing process to direct non-motorized traffic to a downtown area or other activity center. We can use this to link areas of the community that seem disconnected, and that the ordinance itself created a regulatory framework that was particularly there for staff and officials as they are looking at other kinds of infrastructure improvements, to remember to be thinking and be mindful of ways to include updates to the transportation network as well, and making continuous improvements in that way. And I think the city has done that over the last few years. We also said that we recommended to folks that it was okay to change direction midstream if it leads to a road design the community will support. Be proactive and develop an alternative to present to the road agency. So like the city did, that alternative access management plan to really demonstrate that there was more than one way to reach the road commission schools, which was to improve traffic flows on Southfield Road in the region. And remembering it's not just the city of Lathrup Village, but we're connecting other communities in this area as well. Be a partner in road planning and not just a naysayer. So we recommended that as well. And now we get into the village center concept. So as mentioned in 2009, the village center was identified as a strategy for really rethinking the city of Lathrup Village. And the city recognized that if we could visualize that better, it might be easier to help property owners and residents and staff and officials with policy decisions, zoning amendments, new development, and development review. And so in 2010, we created a conceptual model for the village center, and that was the basis for the village center zoning district. In 2012, the concept evolved into a 3D model. So here you can see the beginnings of that model with the buildings there, fully built out, obviously taking years and years to do that, but centering around, and you can see the way that it's laid out, centering around the school. So the school is here. It's recognized as one of the most important features of the village center as the centerpiece, with roads ending there. But you'll also know that there was a recognition that the site was larger than just the school, that maybe some of the components of the school were not as historically significant, and there would be opportunities for new building there along the sides to really make the most of this property and incentivize the property's renovation and rehabilitation by giving up, making it more financially reasonable for a redevelopment to occur. And the same thing with the buildings on the other sides of the street. The 1-story, 1.5-story, bi-level office buildings. The idea at the time was to be able to show property owners that there was an opportunity to update those obsolete buildings by providing this other alternative. So you can see, like, along these side streets, on-street parking, this is a little harder to see, a little town square off in the back, multi-level buildings, and focusing again on the historic school. So in 2012, that model became a 3D model, and we could do a flyover, but I wasn't really sure we would have the ability to do that. But I think it's really important to see in 2012 what the concept included, which is this preservation and expansion of the lawn area. So keeping the school, obviously where it's located, it's set back, but to one of the other comments that came early about would we have parking in the front? Absolutely no parking in the front. Cars are in the back, people are in the front. So creating this space for activities, plaza, public art, other kinds of ways to engage people as they're walking down this road, Southfield Road. And you can see on both sides, it was anticipated that there would be 4-story buildings there. including, and along with the preservation of that historic building. So in June of 2012, there was a town hall meeting to share the 3D model, hear the feedback, discuss next steps. It was very exciting. I don't know if anybody in this room was there. Mr. Kopis was there. And it was really, that was probably the last time that there was an activity in the school building, is my guess. Yes. So that was pretty cool. But that was a long time ago. In 2021, we again took a look at updating the master plan. And at the start of that planning process, we started off, as we often do in our communities when we're doing land use plans, by having a conversation with the Planning Commission, the DDA, and City Council, and saying, you know, we've had this vision for a number of years, and we don't seem to be seeing anything changing. What should we do in this master plan? And there was a lot of discussion. There was, through the whole process, we talked about that. And it ended up that the vision was affirmed. And so this idea for the village center has not ceased. And that's, I think, a real credit to the city leadership for recognizing that things take time. There are 5 or 6 goals in the master plan. I just included the 3 that I thought were most relevant to our discussion tonight. Community character, so answering the question, what do we want? An authentic, positive identity for the city that's reflected in residential neighborhoods as well as along commercial corridors that focuses on a mixed-use, multiple-story, walkable downtown for the city, and then some of the things that go along with that. We also talked about commercial development. What do we want? Thriving local businesses, an employed workforce, a convenient selection of goods and services, and a diverse tax base with a resilient economy. And then we also talked about housing, attractive, safe, quiet, well-maintained neighborhoods, and a diversified range of housing for people of all ages and abilities, and active neighborhoods that promote community connectedness. We also had a market study in there. This might be a little bit hard to read, but it talks about enhancing walkability within the neighborhoods, creating or enhancing spaces for activities and small family events, looking at continuing to enhance appearance of buildings, utilizing space on first floors for year-round and seasonal pop-up retail activities. So there was even a recognition then that we have a lot of space that could be filled with retail businesses, but it's not being filled. And what can we do in the interim to get people interested in recognizing that this is a community where people could do business that way? There's a whole section in there on the village center, but it ends with this paragraph about housing. Housing is one of the strongest elements of the current real estate market. This was in 2020 that we did this portion of the study. The plan was adopted in 2021. New opportunities to add row houses, townhomes, and stacked flats. So the master plan specifically mentioned housing in the village center, although not necessarily foreseeing that at the school site, that the whole development would be housing. But that plan that we showed a couple slides ago, that concept model was revised, and it actually lowered and scaled back some of the potential ideas on the edges between, as more of a transition between Southfield Road and then the rest of the neighborhoods, and making those be more like 2.5 stories. But the model still shows the school with flanking structures along the front lot line. So again, we have the school set back, because that's where it is, but new buildings that come right up to the road on both sides, and those do have the height of the 4 stories. But also showing, you know, green space here, active space, and a connection off of the east side to Annie Lathrup Park. And those were some of the examples to go along with that, of row houses, lived work, stacked flats, some of those kind of things. In terms of land use, the master plan notes that the school is a highly visible redevelopment parcel that could begin to provide the type of mixed use the city envisions for the village center. I think there was a strong recognition, and I think it's still valid today, that, that this is a unique opportunity. This could be a catalyst development for other development in the corridor. Although in the master plan we talked about some of these other I go back to these images, that maybe we encouraged some of that development to take place back here, or off on the sides, to start maybe smaller with housing opportunities. It was envisioned that the site would retain the historic structure and allow for additional buildings, could incorporate a mix of public and private property, including residential, office, retail, restaurant, entertainment, gathering spaces, and recreation areas. Building form, allow new buildings to complement the school, rehabilitate the existing structure, building walls and spaces between buildings, giving pedestrians a protected feeling. Again, that's the reason for some of the height that is envisioned there. Moving parking to the back, and then retaining those at least 2 stories in height and maybe a maximum of 5 stories. Public spaces should include opportunities for people to gather formally, like for art fairs or concerts or other events, or informally for a chance to rest, a chance meeting, or just to people watch. And then courtyards and arcades. We would almost think of that plaza area as somewhat of a courtyard area. Spaces created by buildings that foster a feeling of intimacy and create a sense of connection from people to place. And then everybody's favorite subject, zoning. So in 2010, the zoning ordinance was reformatted and transformed into the current format that you see today, the clear zoning format. This was done to implement the 2009 master plan, so creating these new zoning districts, commercial, vehicular, mixed use in the village center. But it's important here to note the relationship between the master plan and the zoning ordinance. So our master plan is our long-range policy guide for the future. It's our roadmap. It does not hold the force of law, but it's there to help us make land use decisions. So when we have a rezoning, when we have a special land use, if we are going to be amending our zoning ordinance or making any kind of land use decisions, we're going to look to guidance from our master plan. When we have zoning standards, those zoning standards have to be based on our master plan. Any community in the state of Michigan that has zoning, it has to be based on their master plan. And the zoning ordinance is our regulatory framework, and those are our legal standards for the development that we allow in the city. So those changes in 2010, we replaced 6 suburban-style, business-oriented zoning districts with 5 new business and mixed-use zones that complemented the 2009 master plan. I'll kind of breeze through some of those there. Here they are. Now, in 2025, we would say that we would remind us, all of us, that the zoning ordinance is a living document, and sometimes we do require amendments from time to time to stay current, accommodate best practices, and market trends. So when is the time to amend an ordinance? Well, following a master plan, like the city did in 2009, we're creating new districts or standards to reflect policy guidance. Sometimes we'll do it when federal, state laws, or case law conflict with the local ordinance. We've done that in the past with the sign ordinance, with wireless communications facilities, and other things. When development arises that hadn't been considered but fills a need in the community and aligns with master plan goals. And so the Planning Commission has done that with City Council's action a number of times over the years to accommodate businesses that we just hadn't really foreseen and that the ordinance didn't really address. Through the development review process, sometimes the ordinance is tested, and despite all efforts, issues sometimes arise, and to encourage or catalyze development. So in the past, in 2004 and 2005, this is well before we were working with the city, the Office Service District was created. And that was really to accommodate the construction of Michigan First Credit Union headquarters in 2006. It allows buildings up to 100 feet in height, requires a minimum of 60,000 square foot of floor area, and it's located at 11 Mile and Evergreen. This is an ordinance that was created to fill a need in a location in the community that could accommodate that kind of use. So this landmark building, it's been added on to subsequently, contributes considerable tax revenues, and the organization is a key supporter of community events and activities. So it's important to recognize opportunities and make changes that are supported by your master plan, certainly, but to accommodate some of those things. So the amendment that you've been discussing, the Planning Commission would enable the Planning Commission to waive ground floor restrictions on residential use under certain circumstances. Planning Commission has this flexibility in other parts of the ordinance. When we're looking to give, enable a group in the zoning ordinance to have a waiver capacity, we really like it when it's the Planning Commission. Because the Planning Commission's job is to study and prepare the master plan, to review development projects. In your capacity as planning commissioners, you really have your hands on the pulse of those kinds of issues. And that when someone comes to you and has a variation that they need, rather than sending someone to the Board of Zoning Appeals, it makes more sense to have the Planning Commission weigh those considerations. Also helpful to have some standards to go along with it, so the Planning Commission knows under what circumstances they might grant a waiver. There is, as I said, the applicant could seek a variance, but the Zoning Board of Appeals has very specific criteria related to sites and buildings. And they're not really enabled to consider broader land use issues, including the advancement of master plan goals and objectives. So that's really not their area of expertise or skill, so we would like it if the Planning Commission would be the one body that would take in consideration all of those items, knowing what you know. So let's think a little bit about ground floor uses. Why do we have this restriction in the first place? Why do we say ground floor has to be non-residential? Because it enhances the pedestrian experience. When you've got interesting storefronts along a walking path that can create visual interest, draws people to walk around and explore, it encourages social interaction. People like to watch people. They like to be where other people are, and that can make an area more vibrant and inviting. It can support economic vitality by attracting foot traffic, increasing spending at shops and restaurants, and supporting a diverse mix of businesses. It can also improve perceived safety because we have more eyes on the street, so we're creating a sort of a natural surveillance area. Strengthens sense of place, connects indoor and outdoor spaces, so open storefronts, sidewalk seating, well-designed building entrances can really create a nice seamless transition between indoor businesses and the public realm. Again, people like watching people and seeing people coming and go. And it can encourage multimodal transportation because now people can walk, and it's interesting and safe to walk besides riding. On the other hand, why would we want to add flexibility? We could support housing demand by removing this restriction and allowing ground floor residential. In areas with high housing costs or limited liability, allowing ground floor residential can help meet demand, especially for smaller units. It maintains activity outside of business hours. We've got the built-in foot traffic of residents there. Again, still having eyes on the street with safety and security, providing flexibility in lower demand areas. In locations where retail demand is weak, allowing retail ensures spaces don't sit vacant while still contributing to the district's vibrancy. As I kind of alluded to earlier, across the United States there's a housing shortage. In Michigan we have a housing shortage of about 200,000 homes needed, and that includes new homes as well as homes that are so old that they are in need of repair, and so those are counted in with that. And again, you've got about 1,700 housing units here, about 92% are owner occupied, and nearly 80% of the housing was built before 1970.
Jill, real quick before we move past that point, go back to that slide. These metrics about 4 million homes needed and
Yes.
200,000 homes, where does that come from?
That is from the American Planning Association and a variety of other associations and agencies that are promoting the need for more housing in the country. And that comes from a couple of things. So while maybe our population isn't necessarily growing tremendously by leaps and bounds, we do have more households being formed. So household size is shrinking. We have more single-person households, and because of those additional households that are being created, that creates an additional need for housing, as well as a significant aging housing stock that is really in great need of repair in a lot of places. Not necessarily here for the aging housing stock that needs repair, but certainly housing stock that may not be accommodating to people at different stages of life.
And people are living longer.
People are living longer,
And
right?
so there's more demand for housing as a result
Yeah,
of that.
absolutely.
What about all the short-term rentals that remove housing?
Can we continue with the presentation?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so adding flexibility here, supporting local businesses. So more residents living nearby means more consistent customers for shops, restaurants, and services, and it encourages adaptive reuse. So in historic or underutilized buildings, allowing residential uses can make redevelopment financially viable when the retail demand alone wouldn't support it. In 2020's market study, it was noted that new rooftops, which is additional housing units, result in increased spending and demand for retail goods and related supportable space. And it followed to say that if new housing was added, there could be 32,000 square foot of additional commercial space by 2030. We haven't had any new housing since the 2020 study was done. There's one good example. It is a little bit of a larger community, the city of Grand Rapids. But in 2020, the city amended the zoning ordinance to permit ground floor residential in their traditional business area district, and that was buildings up to 4 stories in height. I spoke with the planning director there and asked her why the city elected to make those changes. And in the city of Grand Rapids, they had a significant need for housing. And she told me that as of today, more than 500 new units have been added in an area that would not have been possible before they did this amendment. So they use this opportunity to make a real dent in the housing that they need, as well as building housing in other places. To help meet accessibility requirements, so elevators are required in buildings where no residential units are accessible on the ground floor, so having those accessible units may help offset some of the cost of housing. And then in response to market conditions. She said, providing greater flexibility to the ground floor use requirements will provide building owners with the opportunity to activate vacant or underutilized floor area. Furthermore, additional residential units increase the number of residents within a neighborhood business district, and population density is critical to the success of commercial businesses. Obviously, the city of Grand Rapids is a much larger city than the city of Lathrup Village, so scaling this is not quite apples to apples. However, the goals that they set are, I think, very similar to the goals that you have here in terms of creating your business district, commercial corridor, and being mindful of housing needs, as well as being mindful of market conditions to support the businesses that you have and the businesses that you'd like to attract in the future. So today's amendment provides criteria for consideration that are related to all of the things that we talked about. So these are the A, B, C, and D, and these are the points that Mr. Kopis raised. The project involves the rehabilitation of a historic structure. So why would that be in there? Because historic rehabilitation projects are challenging, especially structures designed for another use. So as it was noted, this was a school. It is not going to be a school. It could be something different, but whatever that renovation is, whatever that transition is to, requires a lot to be able to do that in a way that maintains the structure. Project satisfies a demonstrated need for housing in the city of Lathrup Village. Why? Because a variety of housing choice as well as modern housing units are needed in the city. Also make a little point, well, I'll finish. The project includes passive or active open spaces such as parks, plazas, and or event spaces for public use. Why would we do that? Because these kinds of spaces contribute to the vibrancy of the village center, and it may offset the need for the ground floor retail or commercial space. And the project is consistent with the city's master plan. Why? Because there are a variety of goals in the master plan that a project could address other than just the literal requirement in the zoning ordinance for the ground floor to be non-residential. So what we would suggest as part of this amendment is that these are the things, this amendment is just allowing this project for the rehabilitation of the school to move forward. At that time, it would be up to the Planning Commission to determine whether they feel that these criteria are met. And so that's not today's thing, but that's tomorrow's issue. So in 2014, the takeaways were for other communities to understand your community's history and how it evolved, understand your community's strengths and weaknesses, and don't assume the status quo for either. Identify approaches to maintain and improve. Understand changes in the community or region and potential impacts to the short-term and long-term future. Be partners with adjacent communities, other relevant agencies. Strive for understanding, invest in the future, and if you wait for it may never come. That's all I have. Happy to answer any questions. Go back to any slides you want.
We have questions?
I'll start, if
Okay.
you don't mind. Thank you, first of all. That was very thorough, very interesting,
Good.
very informative. It answered a lot of questions I have as somebody who's not only new to the Planning Commission, but also new to Lathrup Village at large. I've only lived here for about 3.5 years, maybe not even that long, something like that. Anyway, I was especially interested to see that it dates back to 2012, that there have been ideas floating around about 4-story buildings flanking the school. Sometimes in these discussions that's talked about as new or novel, and it doesn't appear to be the case. A few slides ago, you mentioned some of the bullet points that Bruce had talked about in his remarks earlier on. I want to talk about a different one. Austin, if you wouldn't mind clicking back maybe 2 or 3 slides. It's the one that has the bullet points in the green boxes. That's the one. I want to talk about bullet point A. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but in my understanding, there are 3 historic structures in the village center. The building we're currently in, the school, and the church. Is that correct?
This building is not a historic structure.
This building is not.
It's covered by the Historic District Commission.
It is. But it's not technically a historic
technically a
structure. It's not
historic building.
designated. And
Sure.
the church, I don't believe, is designated as a historic
It's
structure.
also in the Historic District Commission.
Right, they're in the district.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So the buildings aren't historic, but they're in the district that is historic.
I see. So, sorry. So I'm thinking about the school, the city hall building, and the church. I understand that including bullet point A, which is the first bullet point on this list here, the project involves the rehabilitation of a historic structure. To amend the ordinance then could only amend the ordinance in a way that would affect 3 structures, this one, that one, and that one. And so where I'm stuck is, unless the city or the church vacate the historic structure they occupy, it feels to me that the amendment of this ordinance only serves the Cerno proposed site plan at the school. And that's where I'm stuck. And this will relate back to the comments I made at the beginning of our previous meeting, which is I'm having a hard time philosophically understanding why we should amend an ordinance to fulfill the needs, desires, wants, whims, whatever, of a single developer of a single building. I don't want this planning commission to be a vehicle for that type of rule bending, nor do I want it to be perceived as a vehicle for that type of rule bending. So I'm curious if either Jill or Austin, if either of you could help me come to terms with that a little bit better. I know that this ordinance change would matter to more buildings than just the Annie Lathrup School building. But like I said, unless the city vacates this one and the church community vacates that one, the only building we're talking about is the school. And that seems too specific for me.
Potentially. I would not rule out those other 2. I wouldn't necessarily rule this building out either.
Okay.
Just for the sake of long-range planning. I would say that I understand what your concern is over crafting an ordinance that's specific to one project that's only going to benefit potentially one. I don't think that the way that it's written, it says the Planning Commission may waive this requirement when it determines the following criteria are met. And it doesn't say that it has to be all of the criteria. And you may wish to say, as the Planning Commission, we're okay with this language, but we'd like to say when it determines that 1 or more of the following criteria are met, 2 or more of the following criteria are met. Or maybe it's all of the following, but the optional is a historic structure. Because I think that it gives you the ability then to consider a variety of projects throughout the corridor or throughout the village center area. And certainly that is the intent behind the ordinance language change, was not to just relate specifically to this, but to allow the planning commission to decide when and if housing would be appropriate and advance other goals of the master plan. Which is why we took this approach rather than either it's permitted by right everywhere, which we didn't think was appropriate, or it was be permitted as a special land use. That didn't quite seem right, because then it requires a public hearing and the special land use process, which to us seemed like if it's residential and it's a lower intensity use than commercial, is that relative? Does that make sense? And so this approach doesn't have it go to the zoning board of appeals where it could go, but really lets you, the planning commission, make that determination based on a housing study, based on evidence that this building is a historic structure and has redevelopment challenges, and that it's consistent with the master plan, and it has other elements that contribute to the vitality. So you're not just allowing it blanket, you're allowing it in exchange for these other things that are also goals of the master plan. So that part, if you'd like that to be, determines that 3 or more of the following criteria are met, that gives you an out on the historic structure.
One follow-up scenario and or question, I'm not sure what it will be. The shopping plaza that contains Lane Bryant, Angelo's, and another clothing store, I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, that's also in one of the corners of the village center. So obviously this is hypothetical, but there may come a day when the owner of that property also wants to build an apartment complex on that site. And now, with the inclusion of A, especially if it's not, if we don't modify the language to make these things optional or whatever, I bought you what you were sold in on the ability to be flexible there. I'm thinking forward to the possibility of that property owner feeling like there are rules that apply to the church building, the school building, and the town hall building, this building, that do not apply to him or her because his property is not tied to a historic structure.
It's the same
I would say that that is that is sometimes the reality of properties that were built at a different time, are sometimes they have different challenges associated with the rehabilitation of those. However, say let's continue your hypothetical and say that property owner wants to build apartments there, and they're saying, you know what, we still don't see a retail a demand for retail in this area. We just want it to be all housing. Then your question as the planning commission would be, well, how do you meet, okay, you've given us a housing study. We agree with you that we need more housing in this community. Where's your passive or active open space? Where's your park or plaza? Where's your event space for public use? How else are you consistent with the city's master plan other than the fact that you're adding a variety of housing types? What else are you doing to make it worth our consideration to provide you with that flexibility? And that's where not making it just for historic structures, you can put residential on the ground floor, you've still got these other hurdles that you have to clear. And any project would have to do the same thing, and they would be challenged to do so.
Thank you.
Jill, quick question. Would that actually say the project involves the rehabilitation of a structure within a historic district as opposed to an historic structure?
I think that's most of their structures, is it not?
But as it says, it makes it appear that it's a historic structure. But if I buy the church and want to redevelop it, it's not a historic structure, it's an historic district. So since this amendment would fit the district, would it be better to say it involves the rehabilitation of a structure within the historic district?
It could.
Okay. Any other questions, comments?
Well, one thing that I picked up on in the presentation was that we have plans and then we have tests of the plan. And when somebody comes up with a specific proposal, it makes us focus on what the plans actually say, it's not just verbiage in the background, it's saying this, and does this make sense today? Therefore, it's a test of the plan as a guidance to development under current conditions. We have, several of us have commented on what seems to us to be a fact that under current conditions, we do not need more commercial activity, more commercial facilities. We're not using the ones that we have. There's some issue about if we have a lot of commercial facilities that go beyond need, then there's a stretching more and more to the edges of what was originally hoped for. So we get into late night versus daytime activities. We get into things that draw out audiences from far and wide seeking late night entertainment versus normal daytime community needs. And to me, I just see the so much of the written guidance that's in these plans wedded to a notion that we can somehow, by sheer force of will, create a kind of environment that we have in downtown Berkeley or downtown Birmingham, when we have very few people in the community, relatively speaking, to the size. And we, many of the existing uses are not really community uses, they're regional uses. How many people from Lathrup Village does Lane Bryant Stores serve in a week, really? You'd say that for a number of the other businesses here. Until we have more people, we can't assume that commercial facilities are really serving the community. So I don't have a problem at all with this first floor use, making it a more completely residential use. I think it brings the community in the right direction. I do think there are other things in the plan, though, that don't make sense. The pictures showed sidewalks out to the street. The plan talks about sidewalks out to the street. No way is any developer going to come along and say, gee, I really would love to develop a business with sidewalks out to Southfield Road and my business frontage right up to the sidewalk. It just doesn't make any sense with the way this community is evolving, the way the road is evolved. I know what it's like to, I think we all know what it's like to have occasionally high-speed traffic go, as the old scene says, gang off the glade. It goes off the road sometimes. Plus it's noisy and irritating. You don't want to have a coffee conversation 20 feet from Southfield Road. What we need is some kind of green buffer. I have ridden my bike around this quadrant of Southfield Road many times. I think I met, and I use the sidewalk along Southfield. I think I've met one or two pedestrians in all of that time on that sidewalk. We need people. The businesses, we seem to have a great draw for hairdresser businesses on weekends. I see some new food businesses that seem to be a little bit classy. But I think we need residential development. I'm not sure about the 4 stories. There's way around that. You could have kind of a wedge-shaped approach to the school so that it's visible from a further distance. Someone talked about 3 stories up front and 4 stories back further. But anyway, I'm getting off the specific ordinance. I do speak in favor of ground level development. It's also, one thing that's kind of confusing at times is there's an image circulating that was developed at some time earlier that shows basically basement apartments. And that's not what's being talked about either. It's talking about full first floor residential development.
Comments?
No.
Questions?
No.
Jason?
Yeah, I'm gathering my thoughts.
Can you wait?
I think just focusing on the ordinance language that's being proposed. It's the language in and of itself in the ordinance doesn't approve of any sort of a project, and in fact, as has been stated many times over the last couple of months, this planning commission hasn't actually seen a site plan for approval for this project yet, just renderings, right? So, but it is true that based on what is being proposed, what is being proposed can't be approved with the current ordinances. There was a point, Jill, you brought up in your presentation about implementing ordinance language that provides some flexibility, enables potential development for structures that may be challenging for economic or logistical reasons. Historic buildings tend to fit that model, right? It's just expensive and difficult to actually do anything to rehabilitate them unless there's some flexibility available in how the city could approve, or how this planning commission could approve a proposed plan. So I'm in favor of progressive development. I think that the idea of something that involves additional housing is consistent with what's in the master plan. It actually refers specifically to, let's see, I looked this up just a minute ago. The 2015 master plan and had limited areas designated for multiple family uses, located primarily along 11 Mile Road in Evergreen. Again, this plan considers that there are opportunities to increase the provision of multifamily residential in conjunction with redevelopment along the Southfield Road corridor. So from my perspective, like the master plan does say, it doesn't say apartments, but it does say multifamily developments. So and we can't get to a place where we can come to some sort of an agreement or concession with developer, the owner of the building, without having this language in place to even make it possible to do it. And even approving this ordinance language doesn't mean that the planning commission will offer that waiver for that project, right? So I don't have any questions about it. Those are just kind of my thoughts about the ordinance language. If we want the school to be rehabilitated, then we need to provide the owner with some flexibility in how that gets done. Perfect timing.
Yeah. That's the one point that seems to jump out at me, is this is saying that we have this flexibility, just like we do with parking spaces, that if the person can prove the need, we have the ability to approve an exception to it. And that's why it's not saying that anybody and everybody can come in and build ground level. It's saying, if you propose it, we can look at it.
Yeah, one note about the parking exception is the parking exception is limited, a certain percentage, right?
No, it is.
So this language doesn't have that limitation in it, which I think maybe it should. I don't know what that number would be.
That
You
would
know,
be
but-
very difficult to me to come up with a specific.
Well, and
you
parking
know.
is a thing you count, right, and, you know.
Right. I'm just, my whole point was merely that it's not a given. It's
Correct.
just saying that's there in our little bag of whatever if we need it.
It's a tool in our box. That's
Exactly.
absolutely right.
Much better than bag of stuff.
Yeah, well, I did want to piggyback on what Dennis was saying about, you know, this master plan was developed, and it had this vision, and the vision hasn't generated the development that the plan was envisioning. So,
I'm sorry, what did you just say? I'm really struggling with hearing tonight. It's
okay, I'll try to speak louder.
Development in the last
You were
week.
making the point that a master plan was developed and it has this vision, right, of what the village center district could be, and the development and investment hasn't followed.
Right.
Right, and part of that is because you don't have the people that would generate the need for the investment.
Plus, there seems to be a mismatch over time between the vision for Southfield Road and the vision for what develops along Southfield Road. And one thing for a nice 25-mile-an-hour boulevard, cafes and sidewalks and all that, and make it look like downtown Stratford, Ontario, but we're not there, we're not gonna be there. We need people, we need better uses of this frontage than,
Yeah, so
following.
to your point, like, you build this aspirational plan, this master plan, and then it gets tested.
Yes,
That's exactly what you said.
Yeah.
This is the point where the test is actually happening,
yes.
right? And we're starting to see both benefits and problems with the
Yeah.
plan. And we just need to address them, right? Because if we stay stringent and strict about the existing zoning ordinances that were developed based on a plan that was not tested, then we're gonna be stuck with unused property throughout this district, for sure,
Mhm.
in my opinion.
And if we don't develop, then if you don't invest in a historic structure, it's gonna dissolve. Roofs wear out, and
Yep.
things happen, and eventually it becomes hopeless. So we need a business plan that works in today's environment that will also support preservation.
So I mean, I would agree with what Jim was saying about having tools in our kit to help us work with the developers interested in investing in the city to come up with something that, you know, it's not gonna be perfect, it's gonna have really beneficial things and probably some negative things, every development does, right? And it impacts different people in the city in different ways. But holistically, for the future of the city and this specific district, the Village Center District, having additional tools to be able to work with owners and developers, I think is good for the city. Whether we use those tools or not, having them allows a conversation to happen that otherwise wouldn't.
So, I had some problem last time, I understand, because I didn't save on toner and I didn't print out color. And I got confused as to what we were talking about changing. Now I have red ink.
We remember,
Is
yes.
is it just the red ink that we are
That's right.
Yes.
proposing
Yeah.
to
That's right.
adopt? And it might be helpful to just go over what
All right, so if you've
what
got,
is actually
it should be
involved in the change.
yeah, a 4-page document. So the
Right.
first part, section 3.1.8.A is the use matrix that shows the uses that are permitted and by floor. So one of the things that I didn't include, because it's a whole other thing to talk about, is the evolution of the city's zoning ordinance from what we call a Euclidean zoning code to a hybrid code or a form-based code. So when we have a form-based code, we're really concerned more about the shape of the buildings, its relationship to streets and sidewalks, than we are, for example, with the uses necessarily that are contained within it. In a Euclidean code, we say this use goes here and it allows this district only allows these things. So like our single-family neighborhoods, pretty much just single-family homes. We're not changing any of that. But so the form-based codes were created along Southfield Road to try to provide, again, that flexibility, that incentivizing of redevelopment by giving people the ability to go a little bit higher, a little bit different uses, for example, to enable that redevelopment. When we have buildings, which we do all up and down the corridor, that are used, they may not be the best uses that are generating a lot of walkable traffic for us, but they're used and the property owners are earning rent off of them, they're making a little bit of money. They may not have a good incentive. Everything's fine. They're gonna patch up here and there what they can, but the incentive that was presented in the earlier plans, the 2009, 2014, 2021, was that you could do a little bit more here. And so whether more means more building or more means more uses to choose from, there was trying to be that give and take, if you will, to really encourage redevelopment. You know, one thing that to note when we're the Planning Commission, we're making these master plans, that for the most part, we don't have a lot of control over what gets built. I mean, other way through our zoning we do, right? But private property is what makes up the city. And so we have rules in place to shape and direct that growth the way that we feel like it matches with our community's vision. But we have to be able to recognize that to some extent, the private property owner has the ability to develop it in a way that they see fit. So there's always that challenge there. But what we want is to get new development that signifies to the larger development community, hey, Lathrup Village is a good place to do business. I'm starting to see, it might be that a new business pops up because they are seeing change happening, they're seeing new investment, they're seeing fresh buildings, they're seeing, if this project goes through, more residents that are right here in the village center. So using that investment, that private investment, to sort of get what the city wants is partly how we start to enable the vision to become reality. So that was not really even, that's the whole preamble to, here's the use matrix that shows the uses that are allowed, and again, by floor. So to that is added under multiple family P permitted with some asterisks, which says that multiple family residential uses may be permitted on the ground floor of a building, subject to the review and approval by the Planning Commission and the standards of 3.1.8. I think that's I. So it's telling us that we're gonna have to go to another section to find out all the details.
This whole meeting about that sentence.
Yes. That just says we're gonna possibly allow you to have residential on the ground floor if you meet these other standards. And that it's giving us the process, so it's review and approval by the Planning Commission. And then how would we know if that's possible? Because we say may. The standards of 3.1.8.I. And then if we allow that, if we go to 3.1.8.D, building placement, again, this is a form-based code. So this code is telling us a lot about where buildings are to be situated on a site, how we use those building walls to frame our public spaces, our sidewalks, our plazas, our parks. And when we do that, we recognize that the historic structure is where it is. And this is definitely geared towards the historic structure. And there's another, you get flexible building placement with forecourts. And that would be if a building wanted to have most of their building up at the frontage line, but they have a carve out in the middle because they want to put in a courtyard or something. We're also going to recognize that a historic structure can't do that. It can't be up at the front. That was probably an oversight during the creation of that ordinance, but allowing for the flexibility there. So that's the next item in red there under flexible building placement C number 2. And then on the next page, building elements 3.1.8.8. So this is the part where we're talking about the different parts of a building, starting with the building composition and the base. So we're trying to create buildings that have are clearly identified as where you can enter the building. We're talking about the pedestrian experience, views into the ground floor space, and we're saying that frontage base type, so the base of a building in the current ordinance is either an arcade, which would be the kind of storefront where it's got arches, if you will, where you can kind of walk underneath it, or a storefront, which is what you would see maybe in more of a typical downtown setting, where the building's right up to the front, the entrance may be recessed a little bit. But now we're adding a third building frontage type, which is the multiple family residential buildings. When the ground floor residential is permitted by the Planning Commission, there is no prescribed building frontage, so it doesn't have to be an arcade, it doesn't have to be a storefront, except that building fronts should generally run parallel to the street. Facades facing public rights-of-way, parks, and plazas should contain windows proportionate to the building facade. So we're not saying a prescriptive kind of storefront, but we are saying that we want the building to be present itself to a public road or the plaza or the street in a way that shows that it's related. It's not a solid wall, but that it's going to have some interest. We're going to be able to maybe see people upstairs, or they're going to be able to see out onto the park. We're trying to promote that, at least that sense of activity. So that's that one.
Let me ask a
Yes.
question here. Under, on page 2, after affirming the business about the ground floor, we have this other statement. To allow for variation in design flexibility, portions of the building facade include jogs up to 5 feet from the property line. The property line is where in relation to the sidewalk?
It's typically 1 foot in from the sidewalk.
That's what I was afraid of. So, and the Planning Commission may grant an exception for a building facade to retreat up to 15 feet from the build-to zone into the building mass to provide an open space plaza or courtyard, provided that at least 35% of the total frontage meets build-to zone.
Mhm.
So that means 35% of the building has to come up within 1 foot of the sidewalk?
Yes.
Is that right?
At least 35%. Mm-hmm.
That's the current ordinance.
That's the current ordinance.
Yeah.
So I heard your comment earlier about setting up with the plans vision and then the zoning ordinance and the buildings in relationship to the speed and flow and sounds of Southfield Road. And that was all part of discussions earlier as well, and recognizing that the median situation that had been originally proposed, where travel would have been significantly faster, that this, working with the road commission on a different approach with a smaller median, more opportunities for pedestrian crossings to try to slow down the roadway. We probably won't be able to necessarily bring the designated speed limit down, but the idea is by putting friction on the roadside, so street lights, street trees, buildings, wider sidewalks, activities, when drivers, and you might notice this, if you go into an area, if you're driving in your car and you get to an area where all of a sudden you start to see street lights and street trees, you probably slow down a little bit. You're like, what's going on here? I'm someplace different than I was when I was flying down the road. And so now you slow down, you start to look, you might see, because you've got people crossing the streets now, okay, I gotta slow down, I gotta watch for people. So the idea is that over time, with not only private investment, but the public investment into the right-of-way improvements, will have the effect of slowing traffic down.
Well, I'm just calling your attention to, we may have other challenges here that aren't being addressed, but I still think we need to approve the changes that are being proposed.
Yeah, yes, and we're probably not gonna be able to address them tonight, but, I mean, the planning commission has the purview to recommend adjustments to the ordinance. So, I mean, it could be a thing that we ask Giffords Webster to investigate for us and come back with a recommendation on how to make an adjustment, or we can ask them to make an adjustment if we feel like we know what the right answer is.
Well, if this is basically about the one sentence and the couple of follow-up issues, one that talks about flexibility for historic buildings and additions, another that says there's no prescribed building frontage when we're having the residential permitted on the first level. I mean, why don't we go ahead and act on this?
Once we finish, then we'll open it up for the public hearing part, and after that, then we'll be able to act on it.
Okay.
Jill, did you finish your walkthrough of the
Well,
points?
I
There's more.
can,
There's more.
if you, yes.
Will you do that
At the
quickly,
bottom of
if you don't
page
mind?
3, the section on windows and doors, item B, ground floor windows and doors. And those provisions are there to ensure that ground floor uses have ample windows for people to see in, see out, see products that might be available. But we've clarified that that's for arcade and storefront frontage types, because it doesn't make sense to have that for residential use. And then the 4 items that we discussed earlier with first floor uses on primary streets, as we discussed.
Okay.
That's, are we finished with the walkthrough?
I am if you are. I am if you are.
Thank you for doing that.
I have a question, quick, easy question. Is it my understanding that the opening the road right-of-way, based on the drawings, the specs, looks like it's about 160 feet wide for the Southfield Road to street? That means that that 31 feet between the curb of Southfield Road to the sidewalk is still green? Well, okay. So technically, just looking at the drawing, there's 31 feet between the curb of Southfield Road before you get to the sidewalk.
I think so.
No, I
Yeah.
mean, it's on the plan, it's
Yeah,
on
yeah.
the actual drawing.
Yeah.
And then from there, there's the space from the sidewalk to where the front of the building would be.
Right.
So just hypothetically, if that's 5 feet from the sidewalk, I'm just making it up, but if it's 5 feet from the sidewalk, that makes it 36 feet from Southfield Road. Okay, I just wanna make sure I got it.
Your math is right.
Check it. With that, any more questions? That was my only question.
I don't have any.
No more questions? Okay. With that, we will open it up for the public hearing for the ordinance amendment for the first floor residential for the village. Oh, sorry.
And I just wanted to note too that I'll take notes during this portion, and so if people ask questions, I'll write them down and we'll go through them at the end if that's okay.
Thank you.
Great.
So, as I was about to say,
Oh.
whoop, there's more. We will open this up for the public hearing for the zone ordinance amendment for the first floor residential in the village center. Just as before, it's a 3-minute limit. Please state your name and street name. And of course, the commission doesn't respond.
And my question, Diane Anderson, I spoke before, and my questions, I have several. First of all, the big thing that really concerns me, well, 2 things. You've made no mention of the 2-tiered citizenship that is occurring right now because of the houses that abut Southfield Road that were never intended to have sticky pizza parlors and all this sort of thing next to them. How do you accomplish getting rid of this 2-tiered citizenry with the kind of development that's going in? Why is there absolutely no addressing the fact that Lathrup is now a community of helicopter parenting? There's no recreation space for kids to be an independent childhood. Go to the Cleveland Clinic and other medical places, and you will find the emotional and cognitive development harm caused by helicopter parenting. But if your community doesn't have a community center, if you don't have open fields for recreation for kids to be independent in their childhood, what can parents do? So why is that not included in any sort of development plan? Because that's what the school always was. And finally, I guess I would be asking the question, where is this knowledge base that there is this great demand for apartments? I can tell you, going through Birmingham, Royal Oak, all the communities around here, there's all kinds of vacant apartments. There's vacant shop fronts now in Lathrup. You're gonna add vacant apartments as well? What's that going to do?
Rick Wiz, maybe just a simplistic question. I was wondering, is Giffords Webster supposed to be our engineering firm and basically holding up our side of the argument, either for or against this development? It sounded to me like they were doing all the presentation for Cernow. Any number of times, we have done this, this is what we're doing in this development, etc. I thought they were supposed to be, put it simply, I was under the impression they were supposed to be on our side, not Cernow. I know Cernow's people are here. Shouldn't they have been doing all this presentation? How much time has Giffords Webster put into putting this presentation together? Are they gonna bill us for that time now? Are we spending our money to do Cernow's presentation? That's it.
Carol Green on Lathrup Boulevard, and I'm stuck on the point about demonstrated need for more housing in Lathrup Village. I don't get that. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't know where the background is on that, and seeing the some of the slides that Jill showed us with the row homes and the stacked, whatever they're called, flats. Those to me were much more, I don't know what the word is, attractive, reasonable, instead of this huge, and I know we're not talking about the whole development tonight. It's about this change in the ordinance, but yeah, I would rather see something like that.
Hi, Jonathan Terra. I think some here may be surprised to find that I think I support this this change. And the reason for that is I sense that the opposition is only for the purpose of obstruction, to prevent development. Okay, at the same time, I think we need to back up and recognize that this plan for the center area or historic area that goes back to 2012 is obsolete. It's not going to happen. You're not going to slow Southfield Road, okay? You're not going to turn it into what they did up in Birmingham, which I don't find that particularly attractive either, because on one side you've got the row homes that, you know, with their own, you know, but that's the end of the line of Southfield, okay? It ain't gonna happen. So we need to back off and come up with a new plan and look for small cities like this that have this high-speed road going through it. Has anyone successfully dealt with this? Okay. But in the meantime, I don't see any reason to not allow, you know, first, you know, the reason for the first floor restriction is for this vision of a city center like Berkeley or, you know, whatever, that is just not going to happen. The other thing I'd like you to consider is I'd like to see something personally, I'd like to see something more of a loft-style development where you preserve more of the existing people. There is a demographic that is attracted to that kind of development. And they don't mind exposed utilities, okay? Conduit running on the walls. It's a cheaper way of doing it, but it's still cool. You're exposing the underlying structure, okay? I'd like to, and that's it. Look at the please everybody look at the ivy in Berkeley. I just became familiar with it. I think they did a great job.
Hi, my name's Lauren Barris, and what Jonathan said, I'm for this development. I've been here 25 years, and we've watched that piece of property just go right downhill. I want to thank Surnow, too, for being so consistent and so many years trying to come up with something that would be good for the city. And I think this would be really good for the city. This isn't a bedroom community. Southfield Road is like a thoroughfare right through. That's not what a bedroom community is. And I look forward to the development. And thank you, Jill from Giffords, for that great presentation. I learned a lot from that. And I know that you are our developer that works for the city, because we can't afford to have our own developer that is on staff. So we appreciate all the work you do, and that was really informative. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Autumn. I live on Rainbow Drive. I think you might be surprised. I'm not against having first floor residential in the center of our city, as long as it's set back and allows for our green spaces to be preserved. We could have something really cool at City Center. That building, if it's lost, will be irreplaceable. It's not architecture you build again. We could have housing that is gorgeous, and what we're being shown is not. And Jill Baum, you've been with us since 2009, is that what I understand? Since 2010. I disagree with so much of what you said. I feel like we've paid Giffords Webster an awful lot of money to give us really bad advice all these years. There are things that are talked about, like creating a sense of place, that structure, that school gives us automatically in spades. That school is a sense of place. As you drive down Southfield and you see that expansive openness, that is a sense of place. As you see those chimneys coming up in the, that is a sense of place. And you talk about events, Jill. We've lost our events, and you're talking about this courtyard, this little cutout courtyard is being, I mean, it's right off Southfield Road where we could use traffic calming, measures to actually calm the traffic without demanding that the mileage be reduced. But it's astounding to me that we are holding ourselves to this idea that we need to maintain our master plan when Panera was just built, and that was not built within 5 feet or 1 feet of the sidewalk. And so, like, we're going to make exceptions for Panera, but we're not going to be able to make exceptions unless we change the ordinance. Why would we change the ordinance for the Surnow Group, who happens to own so much property in Lathrup, that this is like a bonanza for them? You know, they could easily tear down Ashley Bryant, et cetera, use that. In fact, that's probably why we have the hawk signals where they are, because Surnow said they're going to use that parking lot as overflow parking. You can laugh all you want, Jason. It's recorded. It's on public record. So, you know, we've got Surnow who we're catering to. It's clear this ordinance change is catering to Surnow, and Surnow has left that building empty. And I don't think it's been demolished by neglect, unless you look at the roof, which you can see from Google Earth, does look terrible. But the windows they've replaced and the blown down trees, thank you for cleaning that up. But, you know, I know you've been writing it off on your taxes. And I mean, I'm assuming, excuse me, I'm assuming. But, you know, this is using other people's money to benefit yourself and not the residents who are stakeholders of Lathrup.
Is there anyone else for the public hearing section? If not, we will close the public hearing section and move on for the commission to, as you said, make a decision on this amendment to the zoning ordinance to allow first floor residential.
Let me say first, I generally agree. I agree with Autumn actually that I'm in favor of a zoning ordinance amendment to allow for first floor residential. My only objection is a very specific one, and that's what I talked about earlier. I find .318I1A, the project involves the rehabilitation of a historic structure, overly specific, really not necessary. And I do think it will be perceived as catering to Cerno or any specific developer. So I, in general, agreement with the language as proposed, except for my issue with that specific bullet point.
I have a couple of thoughts about that specific point that I'd like the planning commissioners to provide your feedback on. One suggestion was brought up that instead of phrasing it as the project involves the rehabilitation of a historic structure, instead it refers to the rehabilitation of a structure in a historic district. Then it's still specific, but now it's specific to 3 buildings instead of 1. So does that satisfy that concern? Before you answer, the other suggestion is something that Jill brought up, which is we can make this optional to and make in the first sentence it says the planning commission may waive this requirement when it determines the following criteria are met. Instead of the following, you could say 1 or more of the following. And then my question is, well, if it's some number of these, A, B, C, and D, right, how many is the right number? Is it 1 or more, 2 or more, 3 or more? If we get to 4, then they're all in there, so.
Sure. My personal opinion is B, C, and D are all essential and necessary and should be met by any proposal. I'm still not understanding why A is there at all. It seems strange to me that we would limit this ordinance change to 1 building or 3 buildings. And I believe that if we're to change the ordinance, it would only make sense to change the ordinance so that it's changed in every parcel of the village center. So I just don't see the reason for it at all.
So, can you, Jill, kind of talk again about why Giffords-Webster suggested including?
Well, I
I know
think,
you talked about it before, but if you could
yeah,
just rehab it.
really specific to the historic structure was a part of the recognition that they are very challenging to rehabilitate, and especially if they're going from one use to something completely different. And just to provide that flexibility in the zoning ordinance. But I agree with you that B, C, and D are essential. So I think the historic structure part also does limit it, if we wanted to limit it. And that's really up to the planning commission if you're willing to entertain it throughout. Or if you really do want to limit that residential ground floor to just this area, as maybe a first step and see what happens. Alternatively, you could take that part out and just see how things go, and if you get flooded with more development opportunities in other parts, then we could take a look at the ordinance again and make other refinements as necessary.
As a finer point, and this is a response to something you said, Carol, you were talking about the demonstrated need for housing in the city of Lathrup Village. Of course, approving this ordinance amendment does not approve Cerno's plan or any other specific plan that may precede it. And so I do think it will become incumbent upon this committee to take very seriously B, C, and D, assuming those are the only 3 that survive my intended cut, to ensure that any developer who's proposing something provides adequate proof of need for housing in Lathrup Village. That will be our new charge.
We have an amendment that has been presented to the commission Do we have a motion on the amendment, or do we have a motion on anything?
Amendment needs a second.
No, somebody's gotta make a motion first.
Oh, I thought he made one.
No, he
No.
didn't make a motion.
This is Commissioner Hillman. I'll motion to approve zoning ordinance amendment for first floor residential in the village center, short of bullet point 318IA.
1A.
1A, thank you.
You said 3.1, which one?
All right, ready for this? 3.1.8.I.1.A.
Yes.
All right.
Got that? Thank you.
So what we'd have to do is vote on the amendment
No,
and then vote on the whole.
no. He has,
Yeah.
he would have to state your motion so he could clearly hear you.
Sure. Make me read these numbers again. This is Commissioner Hillman. I motion to approve the zoning ordinance amendment for first floor residential in the village center as written, short of bullet point 3.1.8.I.1.A. Point.
All right, now I see where it's going.
We have a-
I'm there now.
We have a motion.
I'll second it.
It's been moved in second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Austin, just quick question.
Yes.
Was there any significance to having the markup for the setback, or just additional information?
That was just additional information.
Okay, just want to make sure. Move on to new business, the 2024 annual report.
Yes, as part of state law, we are required to draft an annual report based on the actions of the Planning Commission over the prior year. A report has been drafted and submitted for your consideration and approval. It is also currently in a draft form on the city website. It goes through and states the reason why the Michigan's Planning and Enabling Act requires that a report be drafted. It goes into the activities of who's on the commission, who is staff supporting the commission. It goes over the site plans that have taken place and been reviewed, as well as special land use applications, zoning board of appeals applications here in the city. It's broken down, and then it goes over zoning updates. We began the discussion of allowing and permitting first floor residential in the village center last year, and as carried over, we began research into and working with the University of Michigan. Staff has to permit and provide guidance to draft an ordinance on the installation of solar energy and battery storage in residential districts. We go through in the report the new hawk signals and a little bit of the history on those, as well as an update that in coordination with SIMCOG and the Road Commission for Oakland County, we have updated our RAISE application to permit a grant for the redevelopment of Southfield Road to make it into a boulevard. Our application last year for the funding was not approved, so there's a revised application being submitted. It has been submitted for consideration, and then kind of looks over ahead of what we're going to be looking at next year. Part of that was the Village Center zoning district permitting first floor residential, as well as presenting to you all the solar and battery storage ordinance amendment that will be drafted and finalized and presented and brought to you for consideration, and then a recommendation will be made to be taken to council. And also we have, like I said, put up on the city website. So this is just for you all to know what activities are going on, and as well as letting the community know what activities have been completed over the last year and what we're looking to do ahead.
There's no action from us.
I think there must be an action to accept it.
Okay, then the question is, this is as
Send
of,
it to, I'm sorry, to send it to council.
okay. This is as of 12/31? I mean, 12/31/24, right? This is technically.
Yes, yep, this is for calendar year 2024.
I'm not sure that we actually ever changed our officers after the election.
Okay.
So I just wanted to make sure that's, because we actually never did. But so everything is right. It
Mhm.
just never changed.
Okay.
I just want to make sure.
Is that right?
That's right.
I kind of.
No, we didn't change it.
Okay.
So we need a motion from the commission to forward this to the council.
I move.
I'll second.
Moved in second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none. There you go.
All right, so we'll go over the site development status. As many of you are aware, we have now put a board, as soon as you enter, on the city hall side of the municipal complex, a board that has the site development status up on there, and it has been updated on a monthly basis. It can also be found in my office on a cork board there. This is also added to the Planning Commission page on the website. It can be accessed from the public, the most up-to-date version. So we can go through it at 27300 Southfield Road. Planning Commission approved site plan on February 20, 2024. Exterior and facade construction has been fully completed. First tenant has finished the interior build-out and is currently installing equipment in preparation for the laundromat's opening. Meanwhile, interior build-outs for the remaining units are still in progress. The property owner is actively working to secure additional tenants for the available units. Spoke with the owner of the building, and they're currently in the final steps of selecting which tenants. Sounds like they've been able to select who they would like to have in the, because of demand for that newly renovated commercial structure to have their selection of which tenants, and that should be coming to you soon. Next month, there may be a site plan review for change of use being brought to you for a tenant that is going to occupy that building at 27601 Southfield Road.
Before that one, do we know if they're moving those washing machines and things out of the window?
That's something I can look into.
This is a question I've been asked too.
Because that's, I mean, it's ridiculous to have this glass window and all you see are
Yeah.
hoses and pipes and.
I've been under the impression that the interior build-out is not complete. Your update says it is complete. And so they may have plans to obscure those windows, those.
I can reach out to the property owner and find out.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
I mean, it's their building, it's their business. They can, there's nothing in the ordinance that requires them to obscure that window, but it might be.
We can
something
inquire
they should
about it.
consider.
Absolutely. 27601 Southfield Road, construction has been completed and the business is now open. To comply with the plan unit development agreement, the applicant has ordered outdoor furniture and amenities. Installation will take place once the ordered items arrive. I believe they should be arriving shortly, and then once weather permits, they will be installed to be in agreement with the PUD. 26600 Southfield Road, the applicant provided feedback following the second review of the site plan. The revised site plan was subsequently approved by the Planning Commission on January 21st, 2024. So they have pulled their permits and they are beginning interior build out on the new auto parts store at 26600 Southfield Road.
Real quick.
Yeah.
January 21st, 2025?
2025, yeah, that'll be updated.
Okay.
27700 Southfield Road, applicant has presented to Historic Preservation Commission, and the concept was approved and the site plan has been updated. It is going back to the Historic District Commission tomorrow on December 17th, 2025. Yeah, my battery on my computer is getting quite low. And contingent on Historic District Review's final review of the site plan, it may come to you next month. So we will then take a look at it. In 28317 Southfield Road, you approved the golf simulator business to be placed there, and they are still in the process of installation. There was no interior work required So it was just the installation of equipment. And that completes my report for the month.
All right. From the commissioner, is there any other general information for the commission, from any of the commissioners?
I have a few very quick things, and I promise I will rattle these off in hyperspeed. Number one, I think this is my 6th Planning Commission meeting. I have yet to meet or see Co-Chair Fobbs in the flesh. Of course, it's none of my business why he's been absent, and certainly I hope that his absence is for no severe reason like illness, injury, etc. However, I do think that this commission ought to figure out if Co-Chair Fobbs intends to remain on it, and we perhaps should be seeking a replacement in the event he doesn't intend to join us in the future. That's my first point. Second point, I want to offer a personal apology. Although I don't create the agenda, there was a last-minute change to the agenda at our last meeting, and it caused some confusion about when public comment ought to be before, after old business, etc. And obviously there was a little commotion in the room regarding that. So I know I personally and Austin and the committee at large, the commission at large, will be a lot more diligent about our review of the agenda going forward, because last week's mini hoopla or confusion didn't reflect well on us, and I want to assure people that it will be better going forward. Lastly, I took notes as everybody was commenting publicly earlier. Most of those people have left, so I don't have responses to share to the ghost of who once was here. But the only one I have left, Diane, is a response for you. So I want to assure you I'm not singling you out. Everybody else I wrote down a note for is simply no longer here.
It is a recorded meeting, so you could, for the
Sure.
public record.
Well, a lot of those I addressed over the course of my earlier comments as well. Diane, you have an incredible amount of historical knowledge about Lathrup Village. From chimneys on the school building to businesses that used to exist that I've never even heard of, to all sorts of things. And I think it's tremendously valuable, and I really, really appreciate that information and knowledge you bring to these meetings, to city council meetings, and other public forums. I think we all benefit from hearing a lot about the history of our community. So thank you for doing that, earnestly and honestly. I do have a friendly challenge for you, however, and you don't have to respond now. In fact, I would encourage you to respond at our next meeting in your public comment, if you may. In your comments tonight, I believe you said it wasn't the vision for Lathrup Village to be a mini Royal Oak or a mini Birmingham. But you so often reference Berkeley as this example for what Lathrup Village could and perhaps should be. You talk about Berkeley a lot.
I talk about the kind of shops they brought in.
Sure.
I gave you that other thing that I did. They have wonderful little boutique things. We have.
Sure. So please, please respond to this in your next public comment if you choose to use your next public comment this way. I see Berkeley as a mini Royal Oak or a mini Birmingham. So something is at odds there for me in my head. So I would ask for you to please help me understand that point a little bit better, especially in consideration of the fact that Berkeley does have stinky restaurants. It does have bars.
It's big, it's huge, it's not 1.5 square miles.
And they're right next to
Sure. So
residences.
again, I don't intend for that to be a dialogue, but I'm very interested in your thoughts about my thoughts. So perhaps next time. That's all I got.
With that, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
I move.
We are adjourned.
Who seconded it?
Oh, I thought you seconded. Didn't you?
No,
He made the
I
motion.
moved.
Oh, I thought you
Jim
seconded.
Scussle made the motion.
How could-
Commissioner
I-
Anderson
and I
seconded
seconded it too.
Because I just looked that way, I'm sorry. I thought you seconded it, I'm sorry.
I seconded it.
You seconded it?
Yes.
Okay.